This is part 3 of the Meddings Grinder SF12 teardown and rebuild, and today we're going to be focusing on the tables. Now, I have also removed the coolant manifold and coolant nozzles and binned all the old pipes. That wasn't really interesting enough to merit its own video, just mostly bits that were seized or corroded. Nothing that, as with so many problems in life, can't be solved with a blowtorch and some brute force. The tables, on the other hand, are slightly more interesting. Now, they do mount in exactly the same way to the grinder, and they're fairly similar, but there are some differences in the way that the adjustments work and they're fitted together, so I'll highlight those as we go along. Before we start the disassembly of the table here, I'd like to remove this mitre gauge. This has been sitting in WD-40 for a week or so, and yet it's still solid. To be fair, I haven't made much of an effort to remove this. I was waiting to film the video. So we're going to get a set of grips on there, a bit of material to wrap around them. This is the some of the leftovers from the flooring, the new flooring in the workshop. We'll wrap that around there so that we don't damage the thing, and get the grips on it. Try and find a way to get them to grip. There we go. And give it a turn, if I can get a proper grip on it. There we go. That's gone fairly easily. Oh well, there you go. So we pop that off. And there's the bolt and the knob that secure it all. The mitre gauge itself. And we can get a closer look at this later when we get around to polishing it all up and getting everything nice and clean. It doesn't look... Oh, it's hollow. I didn't really expect that. It doesn't look rusty or anything underneath. It looks in fairly good condition, I think. It's mucky. I mean, it's like any other day in the workshop. I have to go and scrub my hands. There you can see all the you've got the angles marked on there. And then the bar, which the bar has it's got a little zero marked on there. You won't be able to see that, but it does. So the bar isn't moving. It's completely solid in there. But I reckon with a light tap, because that's I don't think that's even a T for a T-slot. I think it's just a plain bar. So we're going to give this a tap first. We don't want to break anything, so I've got a little offcut here. And hopefully a couple of taps with a lump hammer will just free it up. It's not wedged in there that badly, is it? If it's moving like that. So, I'll say that. Okay, well, there we go. That's... So I didn't want to break anything. I'm going to drop the bleeding thing, haven't I? And there's our bar. That's a fairly plain bit of steel with a threaded hole in there. With that out of the way, we can start removing the top of the table. And in order to do that, we're going to have to knock out the roll pin here, and that secures this casting to this bar, and the whole thing pivots on here. And it's all seized, so it doesn't actually pivot at the moment. Hopefully this won't be too stubborn on the way out. And again, we're going to be gentle, try not to break anything. I've lifted the table up. This did take a crowbar to do it. It seems very seized. And hopefully we should be able to now knock that roll pin through from the other side. Yeah, there we go, that's starting to go now. And there's our pin. There's our pin all the way out. Well, having removed the roll pin, the bar came out without too much resistance. It is a bit gummy. I don't think this is really a lot of rust. I think there's some here, but most of this seems to be just either dried coolant or dried oil. It's kind of gummed up, but it's not pitted or anything. And you can see on the end here is the pointer. Turn it that way. That's the pointer for the angle indicator, which is just here. We'll see that in a minute. And hopefully now we should be able to just remove this entire top plate There you go, and I hadn't noticed before. I'm just looking in the, I'm looking at the field monitor. I don't know whether you can see it, but obviously that's the ring where the mitre gauge was. There's one here as well. That's a T-ring. Someone's been using this machine as a coaster. Now we can get a better look at these grease fittings. And while we're here, there's a little brass plate there. That's the angle indicator. Now I've loosened these off, so they should unscrew fairly easily. And it's probably difficult to see in the camera, but they are drilled at wildly different angles. But if I grab a couple of appropriately sized drills, we can use the shanks as pins, and you should be able to see exactly what I mean by them being at very different angles. Well, that seals it for me. Those are definitely a retrofit, and I can see the thought behind it. I can't see the point, ultimately. There's nowhere for the grease to go. In fact, if I poke this little blob here, that was a big chunk of grease that was stuck behind one of those grease fittings. I think, if anything, a bit of light spindle oil occasionally. To be honest, the bar that runs through here isn't going to turn very far or very fast, is it? It's not even going to do a quarter turn occasionally when you need to adjust the angle of the cut. So when it comes to repainting this, I think what we'll do is stop these up and get some bolts of the right thread in it. I suspect there'll be something like 8 BSP thereabouts. I'll have to measure those up. We'll stop these up, grind them off flush, and then just paint over them. Now we need to remove the 5 adjustment knobs, and this is where the differences start to come in. This one in the middle here adjusts the angle of the table, and that's the same at both ends. There's a little grub screw here. Beneath that there's a small piece of brass, or bronze, I'm not sure which, that sits on the thread and allows you to adjust the tension on the thread so that I suppose it doesn't unscrew itself while the machine's running. These two are not the same, so the other end doesn't have both of these. It has a different arrangement. This is a fine adjustment hand wheel, and it moves the table left or right in what are, for, I suppose, for a grinder, fairly fine increments. Having zoomed in, hopefully you can see the markings there. So you've got 0, and then 0.025, 0.05, 0.075, and then back to 0. And obviously that would then get you to, I'm guessing this is inches, so that would be a 1/10 of an inch per turn. I'm not sure exactly how to disassemble this. I think I probably want to unscrew this out this way. That said, these plates here have well, this plate here has 3 screws in it, holding it presumably onto the casting there. Which would leave these, I suppose, given that I can't see a pin or a... There's no pins there, there's no clips, so I'm assuming that that is a nut. So if we undo that, perhaps we can get this block off, because that seems like it's sliding about. Get this block out, slide that block off, and then unscrew this whole thing this way. Really like you would with a micrometer. I'll give this a quick wipe over. Make sure we're not missing anything. It doesn't look like it. So we're going to very gently there we go. Okay, it's a pair. So it's a nut and a lock nut, really. Bring these round. can't see them on it from the other side. So here we go. There's those two. Drop those in the drip tray for the moment. And then off comes this block. That was nice and easy. And then hopefully we should just be able to unscrew this. With any luck. Yeah, essentially it's just a big micrometer when you think about it. Don't know if there are any other markings on the barrel there. There is a datum line here. There are no there are no other markings on there. So that's our micrometer screw, if you want to look at it that way. I've given this a bit of a tap. As you can see, it's started to move now. So I'm going to knock this all the way out. I want to be careful because there is one of these machines on eBay. It's in a terrible state, and this casting is cracked. So it's obviously been whacked, and the whole lot's come off. So what I don't want to do is end up with broken casting. So I'm very gentle, really. There we go. That's all there is to it. And this is the barrel. So that fits in there like so. It's a bit oily. It does look like it's probably steel. While we're here, I'm going to remove the two tensioning screws. There's one here and the same the other side. These aren't too bad, actually. Don't know what on the other side's like, whether it's still stuck or not. That is a long screw. That's taking a while to come out of there. So that gives you an idea of how much pressure you can put on these springs. And really wind that in. And that's that. We'll find out in a second if it's the same the other side. While they are different, they do in effect the same job, though without the fine adjustment. They just limit the left-right travel of the table. So if we get these out, we can move on to the bottom ones, which are pretty much the same at the other end. And again, they put tension on this plate down here, and then you can push that in, and that also limits the amount of travel of the table. I'd love to get hold of a manual for this, but I'm not really sure exactly how that's supposed to work. I get the top adjustment, but the adjustment at the bottom is a bit of a mystery. There's a pair of these screws here, either side, securing the springs to the plate, and they're pretty well rusted solid. So we're going to give this the blowtorch treatment. So I'll get these two screws done as well. After quite a lot of heat, those screws come out fairly easily. Now we can remove the table base plate, trunnion plate, whatever you want to call it, exposing the springs here. with the screws out, that comes off fairly easily, and there's our casting. The other side is exactly the same. We should be able to remove our springs. So there's one. There's a block down here, and then the other one. I can't find a way to remove this. There's one at each end, so there's actually a pair. These are the fore and aft adjusters for the tables. They move the whole assembly in and out. I can't figure out how to get these off. So we're going to pull the whole motor unit off with these attached, stick them on a bench, and hopefully that will give us a way to remove them. Now that we've taken this off, you should be able to get a better look at this unit here. And it sits on a bar that runs all the way through this casting and out the other side, and it's covered up by the rubber boot here. It's the same arrangement on both sides of the machine. And removing the other one showed me how to get this off. However, unlike the other side, this was seized, or is seized, pretty well solid. I've tipped the motor casing on its back, and you can see at the bottom of this casting there's a slit, 3 socket cap screws and a couple of grubs, and actually over here you can see the bar that it all rides on. So hopefully if we loosen these off, that will start to move on that bar. Though if this is corroded, we might have to give it a bit of encouragement. And this side of the machine was far worse than the other one. Well, it's about to get loud. We're going to take a chisel and just try and loosen this up a little bit. Everything on this side is very corroded. Oh, fuck. If you're thinking that didn't sound very good, you'd be right. We now have a broken handle. The upshot of this is that I'm now comfortable using slightly more violent means to separate the hub here from this shaft. Downside, of course, is that now we need a new handle, and ideally I'd like one that matches. So that means either gluing this back together, filling it all in and casting a new one, or finding a replacement that is either from one of these machines or is just off the shelf a match. I'm not sure that's even possible. So we'll weigh our options up there. Now that I've destroyed the hand wheel, we can be a bit more blasé about taking this thing apart. There's a circlip on the back here, and I think that retains the whole shaft, so hopefully if we take the circlip off, it'll all drop through. And the reason that I think that is because I'm fairly certain that this here is a collar. So this bit of exposed metal there is the hub for the wheel, but I think that's a collar machined into the screw shaft here. At the other end, that shaft has a collar that comes out on the back side here. So it's actually secured at the front. And I'll show you that in a minute when we got the two of them apart. So we pop this circlip off eventually. These are not the best circlip pliers. Sort of cheap and cheerful. There we go. And hopefully that will press through. If it moves anywhere. We can always give that some encouragement. Now under the workmate here, I've got a sandbag and some rags. So I don't want to hold this tight. I'm just going to give this a few taps with a lump hammer. There we go. That's fairly, that's right, isn't it? It's a little bit gummy, I think. So I think that's been injected with grease at some point. I don't think that grease is the right thing to put in there. I think that probably should be oil. And I was right, that is a collar. You can see that. The challenge now is actually getting the remains of the hand wheel off. So I better go away and figure that out. To remove the casting, we're going to borrow the shaft from the other side. You can see it's got that collar on there. Corresponding faceplate. And we're also borrowing the hub that we just removed from that hand wheel. Then turning the shaft counterclockwise will force the casting outwards and eventually off the bar. And here's what's left in the bore of this bar here. This is what the shaft screws into, and luckily enough, it just happens to fit the pin spanner from the 6-inch grinders in the workshop. So there's no need to go hitting it with a punch or anything. There we go, that's all it is. It's just a piece of brass there, or a bronze that's been threaded and sits in that bar. I had to shelve the video for a few months. I've been kind of busy and the editing process has been a little bit of a nightmare. Let me try to get this down to a manageable length. But now we're going to finish up, and actually we're pretty close anyway, because this is the last part we're going to be removing from the machine today. And as you saw, it's got the thread on the OD, thread on the ID for the hand wheel screw. Obviously the holes for the pin spanners, and otherwise it's quite a plain thing. It's just a bushing. But its counterpart from the other end of the machine, where all the micro adjustments are, is slightly different. It's fairly obvious to look at. It's longer, for starters. It still has the thread on the outside and thread on the inside, the pin spanner holes. But it's longer. Obviously it's been turned down slightly. There is a slot here, and inside there is a shoulder. And so in that shoulder sits a spring, and on that spring sits a little threaded collar, a threaded bushing, again with a shoulder, and a guide pin. And the guide pin obviously sits in the slot there, and it all squeezes together. The hand wheel threads through, the hand wheel screw threads through. And what this does is this takes up the backlash as it wears. So as the screw wears, this essentially pushes the whole assembly apart. And if you think of it as so it's pushing against the opposite sides of the thread on the screw. And I have seen these in bigger form on bridge ports. I think there's some lathes that have them, but they tend to have bolts that push against something, either each other or something else. So a bit of the casting, so it pushes the whole thing apart rather than using a spring, but the principle's the same. As the screw wears, essentially you're just pushing against the other side of the thread, and that takes up the backlash. It doesn't make the screw any more accurate, but it does mean that it doesn't wobble about. And as long as you have a means of measuring the distance that it's moved without relying on counting the turns, it actually will work out just fine. Yeah, really neat. I didn't expect that for a double-ended grinder. But I suppose it makes sense since that end of the machine is supposed to be quite precise. So yeah, quite pleased with that. It's a really sort of cool little thing. Well, that's it for today. We've now got bits of machines strewn all over the workshop. So over there is the all the bits we took off today, and the lamp and the other odds and ends. Over there somewhere is the body of the machine, and down behind me is the motor. And that's what we'll be looking at in the next video, is seeing if we can get that motor running. And it's going to be pretty interesting because it's not a straightforward hookup for the motor. And I'll explain that in the next video. So I hope this has been helpful, informative, relaxing, whatever. You've at least enjoyed it. And I'll see you in the next one.